All right, you guys, today we are going to segue into the shoulder girdle complex. As always, I'm going to try to set precedent for things that we've seen before, things we've had before, and then explain why it's a little different. Because, as I've said before, what we gain in mobility, we lose in stability, and what we gain in stability, we lose in mobility. But there are a lot of similarities. Okay, there are a lot of similarities. Kind of like a Corvette isn't the same as a Honda Civic, which is what I drive, but there's a lot of similarities, right, in terms of their vehicles. So I'm going to try to emphasize the similarities before we go into the differences. So the shoulder girdle, pelvic girdle, is an area formed by multiple articulations. Um, again, think Acadiana is several different parishes in one general area that we name. In the pelvic girdle, we had the sacroiliac articulation, right, where the sacrum, those fused vertebrae down here articulate with the ilium of the pelvis. Then where the ilium, ischium, and pubis articulate, fuse the socket, the acetabulum. Then we have the acetabular-femoral joint, the hip joint. The pubic symphysis has an articulation. So it's all of those different articulations, but it would take us forever to say them all. So we just say the pelvic girdle is the sum total of all those different articulations. Shoulder girdle is very similar. We have two sides, like with the pelvis, but remember where the pelvis was explained to be like a solid foundation about which our skyscraper is built, right? There's no independent movement. There's no significant independent movement between the right and the left side. I can't take my right pelvis and do different things with it. They have to move together. It's not to say I can't do something with my left hip or my right hip, but when I move the socket on my left side, the socket on my right side has to go somewhere as well. That's not the case with the shoulder girdle. The shoulder girdles are like taking the pelvic girdle, splitting them and cracking them, and they can move independent of each other in a similar way, but independent. So I can have my left shoulder girdle move independently versus I couldn't have my left side of my pelvis move independently. The right had to move with the left. Okay. So that's point one. Point number two is I'm going to see if I can demonstrate this with you guys. I know it's early in the morning and we all have a case of the Mondays, but if you're willing and able, I think this will really help to demonstrate what I'm trying to say. If you could stand up for a second. Look, I'm not even going to look at you. Okay. So no judge zone here. But this is what I'd like for us to do. Let's put our hips shoulder width apart. Our pelvis should be level. And now what I'd like for you to do is abduct your left hip and notice how you're going to fall over to the side. Your mass is going to tip over. Okay. So one of the ways, if we wanted to lift up our left leg and not fall over, we would shift our weight to our right side and we'd lift our leg up, and you could see how our pelvis would want to rotate, right? We'd want to take the left side socket and kind of lean it so that we could get our leg up a little higher. Think about if you could sit down. I know that's uncomfortable, but I just thought it would visually you'd be able to see. A lot of times these different motions help us to lean in different ways to help our functional circle, what I call our functional circle of reach, to get our hands up a little higher. It's no different than if I abduct 90 degrees, I can get my hand up higher a few different ways. I can bend my trunk to the right and my arm goes up higher to the left. In biomechanics, I'm going to teach you that's a function of a first class lever, like a seesaw, like a teeter-totter. One side goes down so the other side could go up. I could also get my arm higher by just moving my hips and my pelvis. Okay. Now the illusion, some people may say, oh, arm went higher, I must have had shoulder abduction. Because again, they're using global references, okay? My shoulder is still at 90 degrees. to my body. Does that make sense? If you go left ear, left shoulder, you still see how my shoulder is still at 90 degrees. Where are my baseball people at? You baseball people? I'm a Mets fan, so we got absolutely destroyed last night. Yankees fan? No? Okay, good. You, bless you. So my Mets had a bad day. But in pitching, there's some illusions that happen between like concepts of like overhead, sidearm, that kind of stuff. Everybody's throwing the same. You're trying to throw with the ball as far away from you as you can. Nobody throws overhead like this when they pitch. So what appears to be overhead is just, you see, I'm old, but what appears to be overhead is when you lean your trunk and you're here, but it looks like it's over the top, but in reality, you're still to the side, okay? So a lot of illusions that we're going to work through for the shoulder. If you're willing and able, you don't have to stand up, but put your hands together on the top of your head. So we look at that, we say you have about 180 degrees of, and then we say abduction, right? We can get our hands over our head about 180 degrees. But all of that motion is not happening at the glenohumeral joint, the shoulder joint itself. That's what today's lecture is about. And the biggest practical reason why you can't, you guys remember from basic anatomy, we have a ball and socket. The golf ball and the socket have smooth surface, right? The hyaline cartilage for articulation. And so if my shoulder abducted 180 degrees, like I would run out of articulating surface. Like even here, like I would, like here's the ball, there's the socket, like you can't. So we get about 120 degrees where the golf ball is still articulating with the golf tee. And I'm going to show you a trick that we do to get some extra articulating surface. And the rest of that motion that we perceive as abduction is our scapula leaning, just like our pelvis would lean to help get our arm up a little higher. I'm going to teach you that motion is called upward rotation of the scapula. But literally, the scapula does something like this. So here is, let's see, look at that. Look at the prop set, nothing but the finest here, okay? So this is my scapula bone. This forms the socket for the shoulder. So this would be the upper extremities version of this, okay? So watch what I'm going to do here. I'm going to take the scapula. So this is the socket. And I'm going to use good old Ken, okay? If we did this, the back of Ken's head would articulate with the socket, and we need his face, the hyaline cartilage, the smooth part of the face, to stay articulate. So what's going to happen is we're going to abduct, and I'm going to teach you about the external rotation when we go out to the side. But this is about all your shoulder abducts before you just run out of smooth on smooth. So what your scapula does to get you that extra 60 degrees is it does this. It leans. Does that make a little sense? So in certain books, you'll see a shoulder scapular rhythm is a word they'll use, like a 2-to-1 rhythm. But all that really means is that, well, you have 180 degrees of function, like those two combined. 120 is going to be from literally the shoulder joint, glenohumeral, and another 60 is going to be from the lean. That's all that means. Think of it like this. Good old trusty clock. Okay? I really got my $5 worth on this clock. Functionally, practically, we need to get the arm to 12 o'clock globally. This is what our shoulder will do. We have about 120 degrees of hand moving about the clock. And remember, the clock is the scapula in this case because the clock is the socket. and the humerus is the bone, okay? So we get about 120 degrees of glenohumeral joint shoulder, and the rest is this. So that we could get the clock hand at 12 o'clock globally, but we can only get it 120 degrees locally, and the rest of it is literally rotating the clock. Yes, sir.
I was gonna say, so the scapula translating beyond or rotating, you just said, right?
Rotate, correct. We're going to get to the other functions of the scapula. It's all, technically, it's all rotation, okay? But we can look at the scapula as kind of, I say average, but like most of its motion when we go up and down, we'll give that a name. And then most of the motion when we go forward and the back, we'll give it a name. But all the rotation technically starts here where your shoulder girdle attaches to your sternum. So when we go forward and back, technically it's rotating like this. When we go up and down, to me, those are a little easier to see because they're kind of functional, right? Doing shrugs. The harder one to see is the lean, the upward rotation of the scapula. So I wanted to start off with that one. In addition, the upward rotation of the scapula is a lifesaver for extra stability of our shoulder. Dr. Bob McClendon, who was the ortho at Auburn when I was doing a youth sport injury fellowship, to show you the extent of mobility versus stability, he's like, the shoulder is a ball and socket. It's just there's not a lot of socket. He said it's more likened to a golf ball sitting on a golf tee. The golf tee is technically a socket, but it's not a very deep socket because you want the ball to be able to stay on it, but a strong breeze, might almost kind of like a football sitting on a tee, where if there's a strong breeze, you may have to have another player hold the ball, right? Because the breeze can knock it over. So just take a look at how shallow that socket is. Like that glenoid fossa, as they call it, is not a very deep socket. So I think one of the secondary beautiful benefits of the scapula leaning is you have a ball and a socket. So let's say this is the golf ball on the golf tee. Well, at least the golf ball can be compressed into the golf tee with gravity, right? This is your golf tee for your shoulder, and this is the golf ball. Now, in 415, I emphasize that muscles aren't just influential for movement, they're very important for stability. When you're doing shrugs with heavy weights, you feel your bicep and your tricep puffing out. That's them protecting your shoulder popping out of the socket because they cross the shoulder joint. Well, watch this, how cool. I think this is cool. When you're raising your arms out, that puts tremendous torque on your shoulders, right? And there's extra weight and things you're doing. So by leaning the scapula, if this was my left shoulder, by leaning the scapula, it's also like you're allowing it to sit on the golf tee more. As opposed to that. Does that make sense? So in the normal fashion, there's really nothing for it to sit on to help take some of that pressure off. So when you upwardly rotate, it gives it an angle. It's like being on an incline where the golf ball can actually put a little extra, a little weight on itself. That's kind of cool too, right? All right. So for the scapula, I have a little video, and these are the motions of the scapula that we're going to look at. Remember how I said there's going to be different verbiages that some people use, okay? We are going to use a verbiage that is most commonly used in clinics, but that doesn't mean these are wrong. It's just, again, like there's different words in different languages for cat, dog, mouse, okay? Some people will use ab and adduction for the scapula. We typically use protraction and retraction of the scapula. Protraction and retraction of the scapula. I like to use the spine as a reference, but the spine is in the back. a retracted scapula, when your scapula retracts, it's like you take your shoulder blades and you bring them closer to your spine. Think about like retracting a bow. Like if my arms were a bow and I'd retract the bow, okay? Protraction and retraction. And again, why are these motions important? It's literally like a pelvic girdle being able to reposition your socket. Think of it as a little extra motion, a little extra lagniappe for our function. Check this out, guys. I know y'all want to write down. I'm going to talk slow. I'm going to give you time, but I want you to see this demonstration because I think it might be the dumbest thing you've ever seen, but I think it'll work. We have so much more motion because of our scapula that we don't even give it credit for. Okay. So what do we know about T-Rex? T-Rex had little short arms, right? T-Rex wishes he had scapular motion. If all I did was just move my shoulders by themselves, got to really concentrate. I'm gonna go to the side. Only move my shoulders, not move my sockets. Watch this extra motion. That's all scapula. That's a huge difference in grabbing fruit, saving somebody, working, reaching, in sports, the catch or not the catch. Like, I can't dislocate my arm and make it go forward and back, right? All of that extra motion is the scapula leaning forward or leaning back. The upward and downward rotation was leaning to the side. Protraction and retraction is how the scapula helps us get a little bit more forward or a little bit more back. Like if I was going to reach back, shoulder only, scapula retraction, literally repositioning the socket. And if you reposition the socket, you're going to reposition the ball that's attached to the socket. Okay? Protraction and retraction. Protraction and retraction look like this. Again, don't pay any attention to what they call it. That's just their name. Again, they call it menu, we call it cat. It's the motions that I want you guys to see. Protraction. We'll get to elevation. Retraction. Protraction. Now, one of the reasons I teach it in conjunction with the shoulder is for function. Like, rarely are you just going to be like, it's usually going to come with some type of purpose, reaching across your body, reaching back, doing things. And that's the elegance and the beauty of the scapula, is how the scapula can help you get things done that the pelvis can't, because the pelvis is fused. If I move one side, the other side has to move, so I'm kind of limited. But the scapula are independent. It would almost kind of be like this. If I did right lateral, it would kind of be like how my left would have upward rotation. Okay? If I do, it's kind of cool. If I do like right transverse pelvic, it would be like my left independently going pro and my right independently going re. Does that make sense? It's kind of cool. So a lot of similarities. A lot of similarities. Protraction, retraction. Again, what plane is this happening? It's kind of a weird question. Oh, it's a great question. But for the purposes of this class, all of the actual motion is occurring here where your collarbone meets up with your sternum. So when I elevate into press, my collarbone does kind of frontal. When I go protraction, retraction, my collarbone kind of goes transverse. But when I upward and downwardly lean, that's when my collarbone does some rotation like this, because so that would be like mostly frontal. But for the scapula, we don't really say elevation, depression, protraction, retraction, or plane, because the scapula is like, it has a lot of translation with its minor rotation. I like to look at it as the scapula is orbiting the ribs. Like, it's kind of orbiting here, it's orbiting there. And really the only one that kind of has mostly pure rotation is when we do upward and downward, as we're going to protraction, retraction. I'm sorry, upward or downward rotation. We have that R word again. So again, scapular motion is independent sides of a shoulder girdle that can help our function by either helping us go up, helping us go down, helping us go forward, helping us go back, or leaning so that we can get higher. Okay? So protraction, think of progress, moving forward. Retraction, think retracting a bow. Upward and downward rotation, think of it as leaning to help get it higher, then coming back down to help bring it back down. And then finally, the last two are elevation and depression. Those look like this, yoink and yoink. There's the upward rotation and the downward rotation. Let's go back to the elevation. Elevation, scapular depression. Now, why would you need elevation and depression? For a few reasons, a couple of reasons I could think of. If you're carrying something, you may need to get your hand up a little bit higher. You're carrying a bucket, you may need to elevate one side, just like you may need to lift the left side up, okay? Also, it helps your functional circle of reach. Let's see if I could do this as a demonstration. Glenohumeral joint, shoulder joint, scapula. The clock is the scapula, okay? If I'm trying to reach as high as I can, I'm trying to reach as high as I can. My clock, my shoulder can help me get up a little bit. My scapula can help me get up a little higher. But if I need to go just a little bit higher, elevation of the scapula can help me get a little bit higher. Does that make sense? So that would be like elevation, depression, upward and downward rotation, protraction, retraction. Elevation, depression, protraction, retraction. Here's 90 degrees. Here's 120. Now, those things don't happen in sequence. They happen like my scapula does it. Oh gosh, he's there. Now I need to start. It all kind of happens in rhythm. But when you add up all the parts, you get 120 of this and 60 of that. But don't think like we get all one first and then we get the other. You just can't do both at the same time. Okay. So the shoulder, as we know, and I'm going to go over this on Wednesday, has the same movements as the hip. There's just more illusions because the scapula is there to help us get our hands across and do more things. But they follow the same rules. Shoulder and hip flexion, shoulder and hip extension, shoulder and hip shoulder and hip shoulder and hip external, shoulder and hip internal. It's just because the shoulder can move more, that's when we kind of get into these, this is where our do not use midline thing can really come into play. Because if you use midline rules, it works till about right here. And then from here, from an abducted position of about 90, any way I move, I'm going back to the midline. Does that make sense? This is going back in, and this is going back in, but I know those two things can't be called the same motion. Make sense? So just like I like to always use the right side, we're right-handed, and I use the mirror concept that if I had this clock up against a mirror and I did this, the other mirror or the same clock in the mirror would do this, right? Same motion. And if I look and I say, oh, that clock hand is pointing at 9 o'clock, the clock that's in the mirror would also point to 9 o'clock because it's in the mirror. All right? All right? So this would be clockwise as you see it, clockwise, 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 clockwise the entire time. It wouldn't be clockwise, 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 clockwise. Oh, going back to the midline, counterclockwise, counterclockwise. No, it'd be the same spin the whole time. That makes sense? So that's why this is abduction. Abba, add, abba, add. The part that I'm hoping that my students can learn so that you could apply it in grad school is that you're gonna hear like you, the shoulder joint, the glenohumeral joint gets credit for all of this. like you should have 180 degrees of shoulder motion. In layman's terms, my 80-year-old father doesn't need to know those details. That's fine. But we need to know you should have this much motion of shoulder, this much motion in scapula, because sometimes if there's a shoulder problem, that motion might be hidden by the scapular upward rotation. In fact, there's one extreme condition called frozen shoulder where there's just scar tissue that freezes up. You can still ab and adduct. That's your scapula leaning. Right? So that's why it's important. For the test, these are the kind of questions I'm going to ask. All right? Protraction and retraction, that should be pretty easy to see, right? Scapula leaning forward, scapula leaning, helping me lean back. Elevation and depression should be pretty easy to see. When I'm going to ask you an upward and downward rotation question, it's always going to coincide with shoulder motion, either in the frontal or the sagittal, the ab or the flexion, because I want to emphasize that the scapula is helping to reposition that clock so that you could get overhead, okay? Does that make sense? So, yes, ma'am. What a great question. So the scapula for my test, absolutely. They're always move. But it's going to be how they move, which is the important thing to see here. So in other words, I won't do it internally or externally rotate. And we also don't need the scapula to lean anymore if we're going horizontal A, B, and AD. Because think about it, I'm staying on the same level. But if my arms are going up relative to my trunk, I have to help by repositioning my scapula. So when the arms are abducting or flexing or some combination, my scapula is going to have to reposition that socket. And when my arms come back down, then it can come down. So for the test, I'm always going to ask those things in tandem. Upward and downward rotation is an accentuation. Don't say it. I'm always going to ask those things in tandem to make sure we understand that I'm not asking about elevation or depression. So how do I separate elevation and depression from upward and downward rotation? The use of the glenohumeral joint. Like they're working as a team, they're working together. They're both contributing to your function of getting your hand over your head. Is that better? Great question. You're welcome. I'm trying to work on not going down the rabbit hole because sometimes I want to explain everything from the start of time, and that's not necessarily a good thing. But it's an awesome question. So how could protraction and retraction help us with our shoulder motion? Let's say we were horizontally adducting and I wanted to try to go across my body. The scapula protracting can help with that. Does that make sense? So like if I try to make my scapula sit in one place and I tried to horizontally abduct, this is all I'm getting. All of this extra motion is because the scapula protracted. Does that make sense? And again, if I'm trying to go back, extra motion because of the scapula. Cool? Let's do, I want to show you one more. Let's see. Yoink. And then I have a couple practical things I want to do. So you see how the scapula is leaning? See that? See that's again, we don't have to do. Again, this is going to be really cool for graduate school when like you have a certain amount of abinat that you can do where you don't need the help. Right? And then once you go past that, then the scapula, like, oh gosh, I got to start. Think of it like this. Has anybody ever done like shoulder exercises like upright row or anything? And then after it's done, you don't just feel in your shoulders, you feel like in your upper back. You ever notice that? Those are muscles in the upper back that are helping to rotate the scapula, that are helping to reposition the scapula. That's why you feel it like in your traps and those other muscles, because those muscles are working hard to reset, to reposition the socket as you go up, okay? You see what I'm saying? How by leaning it also, we kind of let the shoulder sit on the T, right? We kind of give it some some normal force, as you guys have never heard in physics. We give it some pressure that it can kind of seal. A couple more things, and we're going to do some lab work. Ooh, what is that? Okay, look at that. Yoink. Look at that yoink. So again, like your humerus isn't getting that high without the scapula upwardly rotating, leaning. That's the lesson for today. Okay. And that is the fastest jumping jacks. Okay, so to summarize, all we did today was do, and when I say summarize, we're going to do some lab stuff. I'm hoping we could kind of practice and feel how our scapula is kind of moving here. All we did was take pelvic girdle rotations that are called that because my right and left have to kind of spin together. So it's like one unit of spin, right transverse, left transverse, anterior, posterior, right, left lateral. But because we can separate them independently, we no longer have to have that concept of them both working together to do a cartwheel to the right or cartwheel. They're two separately innervated and independent moving girdles. So that's why we don't have the same movement descriptors. So elevation, depression, protraction, retraction, and again, I'm going to make sure always on the test, when your arms are going up over your head relative to your body, my scapula is going to have to upwardly rotate. And when my arms are coming back down. Now that could be ab, that could be flex, that could be a combination. And again, I know up and down is going to be a tempting word, but let me give you an example of one of our illusions of ups and downs, that it's relative to our joints, not our room. So check this exercise out. I'm going to give you, it looks like it's moving and it is first. Take that first. I just want someone to do it normally, please. Yes. Okay. So this is why planes is important. A lot of times human movement is kind of in these combinations. So if we're just looking at frontal, you see how he's going to have mostly adduction coming down, all right? Mostly abduction coming up. So when his arms are going up for the ab, that's when his scapula is going to upward rotate. And when his arms are coming down, that's when his scapula is going to downward rotate. And again, I'm not insulting the elevation and depression. We analyze stuff joint by joint. And so we're going to have the conversation of upward and downward rotation in conjunction with our shoulder motion, because I want to reemphasize how that scapula is going to reposition the socket. Okay. In other words, I can have it up and just elevate and depress, but it's always going to coincide with the shoulder motion when the scapula is going to be leaning. Okay. Let me play this a couple more times before I get to the tricky. So it looks like it's moving, and it is. Add with the down. Ab with the up. Make sense? Downward rotation to scapula, upward rotation to scapula, downward rotation to scapula, upward rotation to scapula. All right? All right, now the illusion. Oh, my word. No, you just never know. Let's see. Wait. It's in the moral exercises. Good. Ah! Need to put in better descriptors. Remember, guys, this is just analyzing motion. This class has nothing to do with you should do it this way or that way or this style. I don't care. That's not for me to interpret. I'm just here to show you what's moving and to try to prove and explain how it's moving the way it is, okay? Lat pull down. Pull up. You see these descriptive words in these? So let's see if, and I'm not going to tell you, I want to see if we can figure it out. What motions would be happening at the shoulder and scapula? Let's go frontal. It's the same options as the lat pull down, but I want to see if you can see the illusion here. All right. When he pulls himself up, what would be happening? Give it some thought. Don't answer it out loud. When he pulls himself up, what would be happening at the shoulder and the scapula as a complementary set to help reposition the socket? Give that some thought. So I'm eliminating. I don't want elevation. I don't want depression. Don't want protraction, retraction. The answer is either ab or adduction of the shoulder or upward or downward rotation of the scapula. As he pulls himself up, the scapula is going to rotate down. See that? And the lesson again is descriptors of these exercises, like pull up because something went down. Yeah. Like with the teeter-totter, something goes up because I pulled something down. We have the same motions. For the lat pulled down, I have a fixed me and a movable bar. So it kind of lines up with how motion usually happens. But when I have a fixed bar and a movable me, I'm going to have, oh gosh, this might look silly. I'm glad I'm off camera a little bit. This and that is the same as this and that. Does that make sense? Add with downward rotation brings the bar closer to my chin, right? Like when I was doing the lat pull down. Hey, bar, come closer to my chest or my chin. So why would it be any different when we were doing the pull-up? Hey, chin and chest. Hey, chin and chest, get closer to the bar. You get to the same place. Whether you bring the bar down to you or whether you bring you up to the bar, I'm talking about the bar, not like sitting bar. It's the same motion. Our brains, though, need to process this because our brains want to associate all of the ups the same and all of the downs the same. Okay? And one of the ways I try to prevent us from doing that is we do not assume. Do not assume. Let's try a different one. Similar but different. Okay? It looks like it's moving and it is. Yep. It is. You got it. Okay? Associate the shoulder motion with the scapular motion from there to there. Or let's go sagittal plane mostly for the reverse grips. And guys, this is going to be like on the test. I'm either going to give you a reverse grip and I'm going to communicate sagittal, or we'll do the wide and I'm going to communicate frontal. At the end of the day, we do these combinational planes, but to eliminate that discrepancy, I'm going to say, let's have a frontal conversation so you know it's aberrant. Let's have a sagittal conversation so you know the combination is a flexion and extension, okay? So talk to me about extension of the shoulder and downward rotation of the scapula. May not seem like it, but it has to happen. When you do this, your scapula is still going to upwardly rotate. So when you come back, it's going to downwardly rotate. Flexion with upward, extension with downward. Flexion with upward, extension with downward. You'll be my volunteer, right? I'm too old and big, they can't see my scapula. It's insulated. Thomas. All right, Thomas. First of all, how rude of me. Do you mind being my volunteer?
Yeah, sure.
I think it's going to work. I think it's going to work really well. All right, Thomas, let's stand right here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is my hand is going to represent Thomas's scapula. Left scapula, right scapula. Okay, so Thomas, let's first do a shrug. Let's keep our hands down. Let's do a shrug. Elevation, depression. Now you can see how when we elevate, you see how it kind of leans a little bit? Because elevation is a little bit of a lean. It's just not as much lean as when we move the shoulders, okay? All right, Thomas, come back down. Okay, let's go retraction. See that? Protraction, awesome. Okay, come back. All right, now slowly bring your arms out to the side like you do a jumping jack, okay? Good, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, all the way up, all the way up, all the way up. There we go. Okay, come back down. Yeah, Thomas, you're good at this. Follow instructions. I wish my sons would follow instructions like you do, Thomas. Does everybody see that? Okay, now here's the tricky one. Thomas, we're going to go in the front. We're going to go flexion. So shoulders in the front, all the way up, 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 all the way up. See how we get to the same place? Okay, extension. Come back down, come back down, down, come back down. Perfect. Were you able to feel that as we went along? Perfect. Thank you, Thomas. Give Thomas a round of applause. Yeah, my scapula don't look like your scapula. So I thought it'd be easier to see it on Thomas. Was that helpful? Was that helpful? So elevation and depression, we can do it independently, unlike in the pelvis. Like it's almost like in the pelvis, when I elevate my left, I got to depress the right. If I protract the left, I got to retract the right. Does that make sense? Here, I can elevate my left. I don't have to do anything to my right. They're independent of each other. So that's why the verbiage is of independent verbiage. Elevation, depression, protraction, retraction, and then the excessive leaning, or we call upward or downward rotation. Any questions? Any questions? Sure? Are we going too fast? All right. How about, let's see how much time I have left. Got a couple minutes. How about we practice, because y'all, our test is going to be here before we know it. How about we do some cervical practice from your lecture on Friday? Okay. Identify, we'll kind of go rapid fire, but don't say it out loud. I'll give you a little time. Which one was this? Left transverse. Left transverse from. Right transverse to. Right transverse from. Right? Landmarks, chin or nose, sternum, right shoulder, left shoulder. Great landmarks. When these are lined up, you're an anatomical. When my chin or nose is more shifted to the right side, I'm right transverse, left transverse. Here's the illusions. Right or left transverse cervical? Right. How would I have to twist my neck to go back home to line up again? I'd have to twist to the left to line them back up. I had to twist to the right when I left, looking at my right shoulder. Just because the sternum spun to the left doesn't mean my neck spun to the right. Okay? Left transverse cervical, right transverse cervical. Left lateral, left ear, left shoulder. Right lateral, right ear, right shoulder. Some of the illusions here is like if you're leaning over, but you want to maintain your eye level to, like when you're going down to pick something up, eye level to the ground is okay. But if you do this, you kind of get a little wobbly. So your neck can lean back to try to keep your eyes level while your body is literally leaning over to the right. Your neck can recurve back to the left. Okay, so it looks like it's moving, and it is. Right and left lateral. It looks like it's not moving, but it is. This would be left lateral, left ear guy close to the left shoulder. Right lateral, right ear guy close to the right shoulder. Or another way to look at it, right ear gets close to the right shoulder, but in this case, right shoulder got close to the right ear. Pull up, pull down. It's the same concept, right? Flexion, extension, you guys had this on your first test. Looks like it's moving, and it is. It looks like it's not moving, but it is. Extension, flexion. Okay. I think the other illusion is it looks like it's moving, but it's not. So like if I was in a neck brace and I couldn't move my head if I tried, I could still look to the left. Just I'm gonna move my hips or my trunk. So don't learn it. If I look to the right, it's gotta be this. If I look to the left, it's gotta be this. Don't use global landmarks, use local landmarks. Nose lined up with sternum, nose still lined up with sternum. Make sense? I'm not bending my neck to the right and to the left. My right ear didn't get closer to my right shoulder, vice versa. That kind of stuff. Okay. What we'll try to do is I'll try to incorporate more information, but at the end of class, we'll do reviews on previous information. Sounds good? All right, guys, y'all have a great day. Thank you.